Hello guys, DarkLord Project here again, and today we have an 11,000 powerful gaming PC build, so let's get started. So the CPU for this build is the Core i5-4690K, which is $210. It's clocked at 3.5 GHz, it's quad core, it's overclockable, and it's Devil's Canyon. So this CPU is for sure overclockable. Devil's Canyon's purpose is to be very efficient when it comes to overclocking, so feel free to overclock this Core i5 to possibly around 4 GHz. It's also quad core, it doesn't have hyper-threading like the i7, but really when it comes to cores for gaming, it really doesn't make a huge difference. So the CPU cooler for this build is the Fantex PHTC14PE-BK, which is $70. Has a very nice design, it has great airflow, it's 13 to 19 decibels, and it has 900 to 12,000 RPM. So I was just introduced by Fantex by Scattervolt recently. Compared to other coolers on the market, this one is very efficient and it is pretty quiet. 13 to 19 decibels really isn't that loud compared to other coolers at this price range. 912,000 RPM also isn't a very fast rotation speed, so that helps with keeping the sound down. Now this really isn't a key thing when it comes to shopping, but if you are into how the cooler looks, this cooler looks very nice compared to all of the other coolers on the market. I think it has a very nice gray design to it, and that's really what Scattervolt told me when he introduced me to this. He says they just look very nice and they have great airflow. The motherboard is the ASRock Z97 Pro 4, which is $97. It's ATX, has a Z97 chipset, and it supports high-speed RAM. So this is a very great board. Usually ASRock is known for their cheap boards, but when it comes to a high-end board, this board is pretty amazing. It is ATX, which is pretty standard for most boards, especially more expensive boards, and it is Z97. This is the most recent chipset for Devil's Canyon and a few other CPUs. So this chipset is very great when it comes to overclocking. It's just a very good, chipset in general. It has a lot of awesome features. So that's a nice thing about this board. And another cool thing is it supports high-speed RAM. If in the future, if you want to upgrade your RAM to 1866 MHz, 2133 MHz, this board will for sure support it. It supports RAM up to very high speeds. The RAM for this build is the G.Skill Ripjaws series, which is $78. It's 8 GB to 4 GB sticks, it's DDR3, and is clocked at 1600 MHz. So this is very standard RAM. I use it in a lot of builds. It's very reliable, and 8 GB is pretty much more than enough when it comes for gaming. If you decide to go above 8 GB, I only recommend faster or more capacity RAM if you want to do some advanced video editing. DDR3 and 1600 MHz is also perfectly fine for gaming. It's pretty standard when it comes to DDR3, that speed, and at a $78 price tag, so it's a little bit lower compared to most DDR3 8 GB RAM kits. So for the storage for this build, we have an SSD and an HDD. The SSD is a Samsung 840 EVO, which is $73. It's 128 GB, it's a 2.5-inch SSD, and it's 61 cents per gigabyte. So this is a very good SSD for this build. I would only use it for the OS and a few programs here and there because it does have its low capacity of 128 GB. It's only $73, which is a pretty good price for a high quality SSD like the Samsung 840 EVO. It is a 2.5-inch SSD drive, but the case I did pick out has a lot of drive slots for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch. The HDD for this build is the Western Digital Caviar Blue, which is $53. It's 1 TB, it's a 3.5-inch HDD, and it's 7,200 RPM. So this and the Seagate Barracuda are pretty much standard when it comes to my builds because they do have their very low price tag around $50. 1 TB is pretty much more than enough. So the SSD is primarily used for programs and the OS and maybe a few games here and there, while the Western Digital Caviar Blue, it does have that 1 TB, so you can easily put the rest of your games on there, and then the other files like pictures and video. It is a 3.5-inch HDD, which is a little bit bigger than the SSD, but like I said, the case has more than enough slots. It's also 7,200 RPM, which is one of the higher end speeds when it comes to hard drives. The graphics card for this build is the Sapphire Radeon R9 which is $274. It has 4GB of GDDR5 RAM, it's clocked at 1 GHz, it's a high wattage card, and it has 3-fan Tri-X cooling. So the Sapphire Radeon R9 is a really great card. It is a little bit more expensive compared to other R9 but it is a very high quality card. 4GB of GDDR5 might be able to play some games with 2 monitors, but really it's designed for 1 monitor support. It's also 1 GHz, which is pretty average when it comes to these higher end graphics cards. It is a high wattage card. It usually uses around 250 watts. It could be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, depending on how big the load is currently on the card. A lot of higher end AMD graphics cards do produce a lot of heat when they are at a very high load. So to compensate for that, it does have the 3-fan Tri-X cooling. The Sapphire Radeon R9 cooling is pretty amazing. It is a custom cooler with 3 fans, so this card really won't be super quiet. It will be kind of loud at high load, but this card will be extremely cool because it does have 3 fans working at once, compared to other cards who only use 2 fans. The case for this build is the Fractal Design R5. It's an ATX mid-tower case, it has a modular design, and it's a silent case with amazing airflow. So this case recently came out. I'd say it came out about a month ago. The successor to this case is the Fractal Design R4. It does have a lot of very similar things, but it has some new touches here and there which make this case very good. At its $119 price tag, it is very similar to the R4 when it comes to price too. Now, the thing I really like about it is modular, so if you do decide to upgrade some things here, like get some custom cooling or something in the future, you could remove some cooling slots at the top of the case. It's a very nice case. It also looks very cool, and the cooling is really key when it comes to the Fractal Design Define series. This case will be extremely cool. You won't need to put a lot of extra fans in here. It already does have great airflow. The power supply for this build is the Fractal Design Newton R3, which is $170. It's 800 watts, it's 80 plus platinum certified, and it's semi-modular. So this power supply, just like the case, does have a pretty high price tag, but Fractal Design is known for their high quality products. Now, a key thing to your build is a power supply. If the power supply fails, everything else might be at risk at breaking, so you might need to buy new parts. So it's really worth paying that extra money to get a high quality power supply. It is 800 watts, which is more than enough to power up the system. If you do decide to overclock, it could easily power that, and at max load, the graphics card can easily be powered. It's also 80 plus platinum certified, which is one of the highest certifications out there for power supplies, and it is a semi-modular power supply. When it's semi-modular, most of the important cables that you will be using you can't remove, but for other cables that you might not use, you can easily plug in or unplug if you don't need them. So that's pretty much it, guys. Make sure to check out Pure PC, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you later.